During a routine traffic stop, police officers questioned and harassed a teenage girl in a way that left her humiliated and shocked. What they didn't realize was that her father, an advocate for justice in his community, had seen it all. The incident set off a powerful response from the father and the surrounding community, sparking a movement that demanded accountability and respect. Don't forget to like and comment where you are from. The incident that sparked outrage. The afternoon sun bore down on the crowded streets of the city as people rushed through their daily routines. In the middle of the commotion, 16-year-old Maya sat quietly in the passenger seat of her father's car. They had just left a family gathering and were on their way home, the stereo softly playing one of Maya's favorite songs. As they approached a busy intersection, the flashing lights of a police checkpoint came into view. Her father, Marcus, sighed deeply. "Looks like a traffic stop. Just stay calm, Maya. We're not doing anything wrong." Marcus pulled the car to a stop at the checkpoint. Two officers, both in uniform, approached the vehicle. One of them gestured for Marcus to lower the window. "License and registration, please," said the first officer, his tone curt. Marcus complied, handing over the documents. He watched as the second officer peered into the car, his gaze lingering on Maya. "Where are you two headed?" the second officer asked, his tone unusually sharp. "Just heading home, officer," Marcus replied evenly. "Step out of the car, miss," the second officer said suddenly, directing his attention to Maya. Maya hesitated, looking at her father. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, trying to maintain his composure. "Routine check." "She needs to step out," the officer replied dismissively. Reluctantly, Maya opened the door and stepped out onto the street. The officers began asking her questions, their voices low but commanding. "Do you have anything on you that we should know about? Weapons? Drugs?" the first officer asked, leaning uncomfortably close to her. "No, I don't," Maya stammered, glancing nervously at her father, who had stepped out of the car but was instructed to stay near the driver's side. The second officer, smirking, motioned for Maya to turn around. "Just a quick search, standard procedure." Maya froze as the officer moved to pat her down, his hand lingering on her back. When he suddenly reached for the hem of her skirt, lifting it slightly, Maya recoiled. "What are you doing? Stop!" she shouted, stepping back. The small crowd gathered around the checkpoint gasped in shock. Marcus, enraged, rushed toward the scene. "That's enough! What the hell do you think you're doing?" he roared, placing himself between Maya and the officers. The officers, caught off guard by Marcus's reaction and the growing attention of onlookers, tried to downplay their actions. "Sir, step back, we're just doing our job," one of them said, though his voice wavered. "Your job? Your job is to protect people, not humiliate them," Marcus shot back, his voice echoing through the street. The crowd began to murmur, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. "That's not right," someone from the crowd shouted. "What gives you the right to treat her like that?" another person added. The officers, now visibly uncomfortable, exchanged nervous glances. They hadn't anticipated the pushback or the cameras now pointed directly at them. Maya, still shaken, clung to her father's arm. "Dad, let's just go," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No, Maya." "They need to be held accountable for this," Marcus replied firmly. The community takes a stand. The air around the checkpoint grew heavier as the tension between Marcus and the officers intensified. By now, the small crowd that had gathered included neighbors, shopkeepers, and passers-by. Phones were recording every word, capturing the confrontation from multiple angles. Marcus, standing tall beside his daughter, glared at the officers. "What you just did to my daughter is an abuse of power, and everyone here saw it," Marcus shouted, his voice ringing out over the murmurs of the crowd. "Sir, calm down, or we'll be forced to detain you for obstructing our duties," the first officer warned, though his tone betrayed his unease. From the crowd, a voice cut through. "Obstructing? You're the ones out of line?" A woman, clutching her phone tightly, stepped closer to Marcus and Maya. "I saw what happened and I've got it all on video. This isn't going away," she said, turning her camera toward the officers. Other voices chimed in, echoing her sentiments. You think you can treat people however you want and just walk away? This is her neighborhood. You don't get to disrespect her here. The officers, now visibly uncomfortable, attempted to assert control. Everyone back up and disperse. This is an official police operation, the second officer barked, waving his hands to push the crowd back. But the community wasn't backing down. The sense of solidarity grew stronger with every passing second. More people arrived, drawn by the commotion, and the murmurs turned into chants. "Respect our kids! Respect our kids!" Marcus, seizing the momentum, raised his voice again. "These officers thought they could humiliate my daughter and get away with it. But we're not going to let that happen." The crowd roared in agreement, their chants growing louder. Maya, still holding onto her father, looked around in awe at the people rallying behind her. "They're here for you, Maya," Marcus whispered. "You don't have to feel alone in this." The officers, now clearly outnumbered and overwhelmed, called for backup. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived, and 4 additional officers stepped out, assessing the situation. Their arrival, however, only seemed to embolden the crowd. "Look at this. They're bringing more cops, but they can't even admit they were wrong," shouted a man near the front of the group. "We're not afraid of you," yelled another, raising a fist in defiance. The new officers tried to defuse the situation. One of them, an older man with a calm demeanor, approached Marcus. "Sir, let's talk about this. There's no need for things to get out of hand," he said, his voice low and measured. But Marcus wasn't willing to let the incident be brushed aside. "If you're serious about making this right, then start by holding your men accountable for what they did to my daughter," Marcus replied, pointing directly at the 2 original officers. The older officer hesitated, looking at the growing crowd. He seemed to understand that the usual tactics wouldn't work here. "We'll file a report. Your concerns will be addressed properly," he said. The crowd erupted in frustration at his words. "A report? That's it? We all know how that ends," a woman shouted. "They'll just sweep it under the rug," added another. Despite the officers' attempts to regain control, the crowd refused to disperse. Instead, they began forming a human barricade around Marcus and Maya, blocking the officers from approaching them. "If they want to take action, they'll have to go through all of us," said one man, standing shoulder to shoulder with his neighbors. Maya, who had been silent for much of the confrontation, finally found her voice. "I didn't do anything wrong, but they made me feel like I did. I was just with my dad and they treated me like a criminal." Her words brought an eerie silence to the crowd. The weight of her pain was palpable. "That's why we're here, Maya," said the woman with the phone, "so no one else has to go through this again." The chants resumed louder than ever. "No justice, no peace, no justice, no peace." The officers, now completely surrounded, retreated to their patrol cars to regroup. From a distance, more people joined the crowd, including local activists and community leaders. The incident had grown beyond a single moment. It was now a symbol of something much larger. The spotlight turns to the community. The commotion from the traffic stop spread quickly. Videos of the incident, showing Maya's humiliation and the community's resistance, began circulating on social media within hours. By the evening, hashtags like #ReJustice for Maya and "Respect Our Community" were trending. News outlets picked up the story, airing clips of Marcus standing defiantly in front of the officers and the crowd chanting in unison. The footage struck a chord, sparking debates about policing and racial profiling. In the community, the energy remained high. People gathered in small groups to discuss what had happened and what they could do next. Marcus, though still visibly shaken, was determined to take action. "This can't just be another incident that gets forgotten. We need to make sure they're held accountable," Marcus said, addressing a group of neighbors outside the local community center. Raphael, a young lawyer who grew up in the neighborhood, stepped forward. "I've been in touch with some organizations that want to help. We can file a formal complaint and make this bigger than just us. If we organize, they won't be able to ignore us." The crowd murmured in agreement, their initial anger now transforming into a sense of purpose. The next day, reporters began arriving in the neighborhood, eager to capture the story. Camera crews lined the streets, interviewing residents who had witnessed the incident. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened here," said one woman. But this time we stood up for ourselves. Maya, though hesitant at first, agreed to speak to a journalist who had approached her and Marcus. "I just want people to know what they did to me. No one should have to go through that," she said, her voice steady but her eyes still betraying the hurt she felt. Marcus, standing beside her, added, "This isn't just about Maya. It's about every child, every family in communities like ours who deal with this kind of treatment. We deserve respect, and we're not going to stop until we get it." Their words resonated far beyond their neighborhood. National news channels began covering the story, and activists from across the country reached out, offering support and solidarity. By the end of the week, the community had organized a town hall meeting to discuss their next steps. The event was packed, with residents filling every chair and standing along the walls. Local leaders, activists, and legal experts were invited to speak, providing guidance on how to channel the community's energy into meaningful action. "This isn't just a moment. It's a movement," said Raphael, addressing the room. "We have an opportunity to demand real change, not just for us, but for communities everywhere." The meeting ended with a plan. They would organize a peaceful march through the city, demanding accountability from the police department and broader reforms to prevent future abuses. As the residents left the meeting, there was a renewed sense of hope and determination. What had begun as a moment of pain and humiliation was evolving into a powerful call for justice. The day of the march arrived with clear skies and a palpable energy in the air. Hundreds of people gathered at the starting point, carrying signs with messages like "Justice for Maya" and "End racial profiling." Marcus and Maya led the march, walking side by side at the front of the crowd. Behind them, a sea of people moved in unison, their voices echoing through the city streets. "No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace." The march drew attention from onlookers, many of whom joined in as it passed. News crews followed closely, broadcasting the event live. Maya, though still overwhelmed by the attention, walked with her head held high. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked her as they reached the city square. "Strong," Maya replied, squeezing his hand. At the square, a stage had been set up for speeches. Raphael, now one of the key organizers of the movement, addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about a system that allows this to happen over and over again. Today, we're sending a message. Enough is enough." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Maya was the final speaker of the day. Standing in front of the microphone, she took a deep breath and began, "I didn't ask for any of this to happen. But now that it has, I know I can't stay silent. What happened to me isn't just my story. It's the story of so many people who are tired of being treated like they don't matter. But today, we're saying, we do matter. And we're not going to stop fighting until things change." Her words were met with a standing ovation. As she stepped away from the microphone, Marcus hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Maya," he whispered. The march marked a turning point. The story of Maya and her community became a national symbol of resilience and the fight for justice. The fight moves forward. The march had left an undeniable impact. The story of Maya and her community spread far and wide, with news outlets, influencers, and activists amplifying their message. The national conversation about policing, racial profiling, and systemic abuses was reignited, and Maya became a reluctant but powerful symbol of resilience. In the days that followed, Marcus and Raphael met with legal advisors and civil rights organizations to plan their next steps. The evidence collected, videos, testimonies, and even police reports was more than enough to file a formal complaint against the officers involved. But Marcus wanted more than just accountability for a single incident. "We need to push for real change, Raphael," Marcus said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "If we stop at punishing these officers, the system will keep creating more like them." Raphael nodded. "That's why we're pushing for oversight. Independent reviews, body cameras, training, things that actually prevent this from happening again." The community rallied behind the legal efforts. Residents volunteered to collect additional testimonies and organize meetings to keep the momentum alive. Even as the immediate outrage began to fade from the national spotlight, the people closest to the incident refused to let it be forgotten. As the movement gained traction, the local police department was forced to respond. In a public statement, the police chief acknowledged that the incident involving Maya was under review and promised a thorough investigation. But for many in the community, the statement felt hollow. "They always say the same thing, but nothing ever changes," said a neighbor during one of the community meetings. The frustration only fueled the determination of Marcus and his allies. They organized a press conference inviting journalists and activists to hear directly from Maya, Marcus, and Raphael. "This isn't about one bad cop," Raphael said, addressing the cameras. "It's about a culture that allows these things to happen, unchecked over and over again. That's what we're fighting to change." Maya, though nervous, stepped up to the microphone. "What they did to me made me feel small, like I didn't matter. But because of my dad, my friends, and my community, I know that's not true. And I'm here to make sure no one else has to feel like that," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions welling up inside her. Her words resonated far beyond the room. Clips from the press conference circulated widely online, and Maya's bravery inspired people from all walks of life to share their own stories of facing similar injustices. Filing the complaint was only the beginning. Marcus and Raphael knew that taking on the system would be an uphill battle. The officers' lawyers immediately pushed back, denying the allegations and attempting to discredit the videos. "They're going to throw everything at us," Raphael warned, "but we're ready." The case became a focal point in the media, with pundits and commentators weighing in on both sides. Protests continued, not just in Maya's community, but in other cities where people demanded accountability for similar abuses. Inside the courtroom, Marcus and Maya sat side by side as Raphael presented their case. The footage of the incident, the outcry from the community, and Maya's testimony painted a damning picture of the officer's actions. When Maya took the stand, her words were calm but powerful. "I was scared. I didn't know why they were targeting me, but now I know it wasn't about what I did. It was about who I am." Her testimony silenced the courtroom. Even the officers avoided meeting her gaze. The court ruled in favor of Maya and her family, ordering disciplinary action against the officers involved and awarding damages for the harm caused. While the victory was significant, Marcus and Raphael saw it as just one step in a larger fight. "This isn't just about us," Marcus said during a community meeting after the verdict. "We've opened a door. Now we need to keep it open for everyone else." Maya's story became more than a legal case. It became a rallying cry for systemic reform. Schools, community centers, and activist groups invited her to speak about her experience. And she embraced the role reluctantly at first, but with growing confidence. "It's not easy, but if my story can help even one person feel like they're not alone, then it's worth it," she said during an event at a local high school. Her father, Marcus, continued to lead community efforts, working with Raphael and others to push for broader changes in policing and accountability. Though the scars of that day would never fully heal, Maya and her community found strength in their shared resilience. Together, they turned an act of injustice into a movement that demanded dignity, respect, and change. The movement grows. The community's fight for justice showed no signs of slowing. What began as a local outrage over the mistreatment of Maya had evolved into a full-fledged movement. Across the country, communities facing similar struggles were taking notice, inspired by Maya's courage and the relentless determination of her neighbors. National civil rights organizations stepped in to offer support, providing legal expertise, media training, and connections to activists in other cities. What started as a case in a single courtroom now symbolized the broader fight for systemic change. "This isn't just about our neighborhood anymore. It's about every community that's ever been ignored or mistreated," Marcus said during a strategy meeting. Raphael led the charge, organizing a coalition of advocates to draft policy recommendations for the local government. Among their demands were mandatory body cameras for officers, independent review boards for complaints, and training programs focused on bias and community engagement. The proposals gained traction when local officials, under pressure from widespread media coverage, agreed to meet with representatives from the community. Marcus, Raphael, and a group of residents attended the meeting, determined to make their voices heard. "We're not here to ask for favors. We're here to demand what's fair, accountability and respect, Marcus said firmly, addressing the officials across the table. While the conversation was tense at times, it was a step forward. The City Council announced a plan to evaluate the proposed reforms, and the police department faced mounting calls to implement immediate changes. Despite the progress, not everyone supported the movement. Some groups criticized the protests and reforms, arguing that they undermined law enforcement. On social media, divisive debates raged, with some defending the officers involved and others doubling down on their support for Maya and her community. "They're just trying to do their jobs," one commenter wrote. "Their job isn't to harass people. The community deserves better," another replied. For Maya, the backlash was hard to process. Though she had become a symbol of resilience, she still struggled with the personal impact of what had happened. "Sometimes it feels like no matter what we do, people will always find a reason to hate us," she confided to Marcus one evening. "People fear change, Maya. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for it," he replied, putting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Inspired by Maya's bravery, other young people in the community began to step forward. At a youth-led rally, students shared their own stories of discrimination and called for change. "They told us to stay quiet and stay in our place, but we're here to show them that we have a voice," said one teenager, addressing the crowd. Maya, now more confident in her role, took the stage to speak. "I used to think my story didn't matter, but now I see that it does, just like all of yours do. Together we can make sure they hear us." The crowd erupted in applause, their chants of solidarity echoing through the streets. As the movement gained momentum, the community began investing in its future. With the help of donations and grants from supportive organizations, they established a resource center to provide legal assistance, workshops on civic engagement, and a safe space for young people to connect and organize. The center, named Maya's Voice, became a beacon of hope. Schools and community groups from across the region visited to learn from their efforts, and Maya herself often spoke to visitors about the importance of standing up for what's right. "We didn't choose this fight, but we chose to finish it," she said during one event. The ripple effect of the movement was undeniable. Cities across the country began re-evaluating their policing practices, and Maya's story was cited in discussions about national reform. Leaders in Congress referenced her courage during debates, and activists used her case as a rallying point for broader change. Though there was still a long road ahead, Marcus, Maya, and their community knew they had sparked something powerful. "They tried to break us, but we showed them what happens when we come together," Marcus said during a community celebration marking 6 months since the march. The movement in motion. The weeks following the march were pivotal. What had started as a cry for justice from a single community now resonated across the nation. News outlets continued to follow the story, and support for Maya and her neighborhood poured in from all corners. Celebrities, activists, and organizations pledged their voices and resources to the cause, further amplifying the community's demands. Despite the momentum, the challenges were far from over. The legal proceedings against the officers dragged on, and public opinion remained divided. While many rallied behind Maya, others criticized the movement, claiming it painted law enforcement in an unfair light. "They're trying to make us look like criminals just for standing up for ourselves," Marcus said during a meeting at the community center. "That's because they're scared of what we're building," Raphael replied. "They know we're exposing the truth." The center, now a bustling hub of activity, was filled with residents organizing events, collecting donations, and strategizing next steps. Among them was Maya, who had found her voice as both a leader and a symbol of resilience. Maya's days were busier than ever. Between school, media appearances, and community meetings, she barely had time to process everything that had happened. Yet, she remained determined. "I don't want this to just be about me. It has to mean something bigger," she told her father one evening. Marcus nodded, his pride evident. "It already does, Maya. Look at what you've inspired." As the community worked to push for systemic reforms, they also focused on strengthening themselves. Workshops on legal rights, de-escalation tactics, and community organizing were held regularly at the center. Residents who once felt powerless began to see themselves as agents of change. This isn't just about fighting back. It's about building something better, Raphael said during one of the workshops. In court, the case against the officers was met with fierce resistance. Their lawyers argued that the stop was lawful and that any claims of harassment were exaggerated. But the community's evidence, videos, testimonies, and public outcry painted a different picture. Raphael, leading the legal team, was relentless. This isn't just about one incident. It's about a pattern of behavior that needs to end, he said during his opening statement. Maya once again found herself on the stand. Her testimony was raw and powerful, recounting the fear and humiliation she had felt during the stop. I didn't understand why they were targeting me. I kept thinking, what did I do wrong? But now I know it wasn't about me. It was about how they saw me, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, the gravity of her experience sinking in. The court ruled in favor of Maya and her community, ordering disciplinary actions against the officers involved and awarding damages to Maya's family. While the victory was celebrated, Marcus and Raphael were quick to remind everyone that the fight was far from over. This is just the beginning. Real change doesn't happen in a courtroom. It happens in the streets, in our schools, and in our homes, Marcus said during a community meeting. The victory also inspired other neighborhoods to take action. Across the city, communities began organizing their own efforts to address issues of policing and systemic inequality. Maya's story became a beacon for others. She was invited to speak at schools, community events, and even national conferences, where her words inspired countless others to share their own experiences and fight for justice. If we don't speak up, nothing changes. But when we stand together, we're unstoppable, she said during one of her speeches. Though the scars of what happened would never fully heal, Maya and her community found strength in their shared resilience. Together, they had turned pain into power, setting the stage for lasting change. The long road to change months turned into a year, but the fire ignited by Maya and her community continued to burn brightly. Across the nation, her story became a touchstone in discussions about policing and systemic injustice. While the courtroom victory had brought some closure, the fight for broader reforms remained ongoing. At the Resource Center, now a symbol of the community's resilience, residents gathered regularly to strategize and support one another. The workshops and programs, originally focused on immediate needs, had expanded into long-term initiatives, including youth mentorship, civic engagement training, and support for families affected by police misconduct. This place isn't just about reacting to what's wrong. It's about building something better, Raphael explained during a meeting with new volunteers. For Maya, life had changed in ways she couldn't have imagined. She balanced school with her growing role as an advocate, traveling to speak at events and working with activists from across the country. Sometimes it feels overwhelming, she admitted to Marcus one evening. But I can't stop now. Too many people are counting on us. You're doing more than anyone could ask, Maya. Just remember you're not alone in this, Marcus replied, his pride in her evident. Maya's story continued to inspire. Community leaders and activists in other cities used it as a rallying point, organizing marches, town halls, and campaigns for reform. Nationally, lawmakers began drafting legislation aimed at addressing the issues her case had highlighted, including mandatory body cameras, independent oversight of police misconduct, and stronger protections against racial profiling. At a congressional hearing on police reform, Maya was invited to testify. Standing before a panel of lawmakers, she spoke with the same clarity and conviction that had carried her through the darkest moments of her journey. What happened to me wasn't just about one bad decision or one bad officer. It was about a system that allows people like me to be seen as less than. But my community showed me that when we stand together, we can change the system. Her testimony was met with applause, and clips of her words spread rapidly online, reigniting the conversation around policing and justice. While Maya's voice reached far beyond the borders of her neighborhood, the community itself remained the heart of the movement. Residents who once felt powerless now saw themselves as agents of change, leading initiatives to improve education, safety, and opportunity for future generations. Marcus, always at the center of these efforts, worked tirelessly to ensure the momentum didn't fade. "We didn't go through all of this just to go back to how things were," he said, during a community celebration marking the anniversary of the march. The resource center, now officially named Maya's Voice, had become a beacon of hope not just for their community, but for others across the city. Its programs were replicated in other neighborhoods, creating a network of support and solidarity. One quiet evening, Maya and Marcus sat together on the steps of their home, watching the neighborhood come alive with the sounds of laughter and music. "Did you ever think it would get this big?" Maya asked, her gaze distant. "No, but I always knew our community was capable of something great," Marcus replied. "I just hope it lasts," she said softly. "It will, because people like you are going to make sure of it," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. Maya smiled, her resolve unwavering. While the headlines began to shift to other stories, the work Maya and her community had started continued. They knew the fight for justice was a marathon, not a sprint, and they were committed to seeing it through. The movement inspired by their story became a blueprint for other communities facing similar struggles. Programs were created, policies were changed, and lives were transformed, all because one community refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. The legacy of resistance. The story of Maya and her community became more than just a moment in time. It evolved into a lasting symbol of resilience and the power of collective action. As the years passed, the impact of their fight for justice rippled outward, inspiring change in ways they had never anticipated. The resource center, Maya's Voice, flourished as a hub of empowerment. Its walls were adorned with photos from the march, clippings of news stories, and handwritten notes from people whose lives had been touched by the movement. The programs expanded, offering scholarships, legal aid, and even leadership training for young activists. Maya, now in her early 20s, had grown into a confident leader. Though she remained humble, her presence was magnetic, inspiring those around her to believe in their own ability to create change. At a youth conference hosted by the center, she stood before a crowd of hundreds, sharing her journey. "I was just a girl in a car that day, scared and confused, but because my community stood with me, I found my voice. And now, it's our responsibility to make sure no one else has to feel like I did." The applause was thunderous, and the energy in the room was electric. Young people from across the country left the event ready to take action in their own communities. The reforms spurred by Maya's case didn't happen overnight, but they came. The police department adopted new policies including de-escalation training, independent oversight boards, and stricter accountability measures for misconduct. While these changes were significant, Marcus often reminded the community that the work wasn't finished. "Policies are just words on paper until we make sure they're followed," he said during one of the center's workshops. Nationally, Maya's story became a case study in activism. Lawmakers referenced her testimony during debates on police reform, and civil rights organizations used her journey as a rallying cry for continued efforts. Despite the outward successes, Maya often found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. One evening, as she sat on the steps of the resource center, Marcus joined her. "You've come a long way, Maya," he said, smiling. "We all have, Dad. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough," she replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Marcus nodded, understanding her doubts. "Change takes time. What we've done is plant seeds. It's up to the next generation to make sure they grow." Maya leaned against his shoulder, comforted by his words. On the 5-year anniversary of the march, the community gathered once again in the square where it all began. The event, now an annual tradition, drew people from across the country. Activists, politicians, and everyday citizens came to honor the movement that had started with a single act of resistance. Maya, now recognized as a national figure, took the stage to address the crowd. 5 years ago, we stood here to say, enough, and today we're still standing. Not because the fight is over, but because the fight continues. Every step we take brings us closer to a world where respect, dignity, and justice aren't just ideals, they're reality. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the city. As the celebration wound down, Maya recorded a message for the center's social media page, addressing those who had followed her journey. "To everyone watching this, you have power. No matter how small you feel, no matter how impossible it seems, you can make a difference. What happened here started with one voice, but it became a chorus because people like you refused to stay silent. She paused, looking directly into the camera. So ask yourself, what will you do? How will you use your voice? The story of Maya and her community reminds us that real change begins with courage and grows through unity. Their fight wasn't just about one girl, one moment, or one community. It was about showing the world what's possible when people come together to demand justice. And now, it's your turn. If this story moved you, share it. Tell us where you're from and how you're making a difference. Let Maya's journey inspire you to take action in your own way. Together, we can create a future where stories like hers are no longer necessary. Thank you for following this journey to the end. Your voice is part of this fight. Let's continue to stand together.